When my 8-year-old grandson told me his parents were planning to kill me, I didn't feel fear. I felt vindicated. Strange, isn't it? How validation can taste sweeter than safety. How being right can matter more than being alive. But standing there in my study, watching little Joe's tear-streaked face as he clutched his Captain America backpack, all I could think was, finally, someone else sees what I've been seeing. The mahogany grandfather clock my father's, then mine, soon to be nobody's, ticked its measured rhythm in the corner. Tick, tock, tick, tock, each second sounding heavier than the last, like footsteps approaching an execution. Grandpa William? Joe's voice wavered, small and scared. Did you hear what I said? I heard him. Oh, I heard him perfectly. Every syllable had crystallized in the air between us, sharp as winter frost on window glass. But hearing and processing are different beasts entirely, especially when your blood runs thick with betrayal and thin with surprise that never quite arrives. Tell me again, Joe. I lowered myself into my leather chair slowly, deliberately. The way you move when the world has tilted, but you refuse to let it show. Tell me exactly what you heard. If you feel like this story might reach you somehow, follow the channel. That way, you help me bring more stories like this, and we grow with every life we learn from. 3 months earlier, I'd have laughed at the thought. 3 months earlier, I still believed in the sanctity of blood, the bonds of family, the weight of legacy. 3 months earlier, I was a different kind of fool. Thompson Manufacturing had been my life's work. 43 years of 16-hour days, missed birthdays, cold dinners, and warm handshakes with men who'd rather see me bankrupt than breathing. I built it from a 2-man operation in a leaking warehouse to a company worth more millions than I cared to count anymore. Not because I was brilliant, though. I wasn't stupid, but because I understood something fundamental. Businesses are built on trust, and trust is built on time. Cleveland never understood that. My son, named after the city that made us, molded us, maybe murdered us, he thought trust was something you could download, upgrade, optimize. He thought relationships were metrics, employees were expenses, and fathers were obstacles. The world's moving faster than you, Dad. He'd said that Tuesday in March, standing in my office like he owned it already. AI, automation, algorithmic efficiency. These aren't buzzwords anymore. They're survival. Survival. The word had hung between us like a blade. Survival, I'd repeated, tasting the irony. I've survived 3 recessions, 2 hostile takeovers, and 1 actual fire that burned half our inventory. But sure, Cleveland, tell me about survival. His jaw had tightened the way it did when he was 7, and I wouldn't let him have ice cream before dinner. Some things never change. Some things change too much. That's exactly the problem, he'd said, his voice dropping to that controlled register he'd learned at Wharton. You think past performance guarantees future results. It doesn't. Not anymore. Past performance, future results. He talked like a quarterly report, walked like a TED Talk, and somewhere along the way, I'd lost my son to a PowerPoint presentation. But losing him to ambition was one thing. Losing my life to it? That was something else entirely. Part 2. The Color of Money Joe visited every Saturday. It was the one tradition Cleveland couldn't optimize away, though God knows he'd tried. It's inefficient, he'd argued last month, driving 40 minutes each way, disrupting his study schedule. It's family, I'd interrupted. Some things aren't supposed to be efficient. But even Joe's visits had changed. The boy who used to burst through my door like sunlight through storm clouds now entered quietly, carefully, checking corners like something might jump out. The boy who used to climb into my lap with sticky fingers and endless questions now sat across from me, hands folded, waiting for permission to speak. Cleveland's wife, Patricia, pretty Patricia, with her pharmaceutical smile and perfect posture, she'd done that. Trained the joy out of him like you'd train a puppy not to jump on furniture. Every Saturday, she'd drop him off with the same rehearsed reminder. Be good for Grandpa. Don't touch anything expensive. Don't ask too many questions. Don't. The word had become Joe's compass, pointing him away from everything that made him beautifully, chaotically ate. That particular Saturday, the one that changed everything, started like all the others. Patricia's white Tesla whispered up my driveway at precisely 10 a.m. Joe emerged, backpack first, body second, like he was entering hostile territory. "Hey, champion," I'd called from the doorway, forcing cheer into my voice. "Ready for some serious pancake destruction?" He'd almost smiled. Almost. But Patricia's window was rolling down, and her voice cut through the morning air like a scalpel through skin. "No syrup, William. We discussed this. The sugar makes him hyperactive." We hadn't discussed anything, she decreed. I'd ignored. And we developed this dance of passive aggression that would have been amusing if it wasn't slowly poisoning my relationship with my grandson. Of course, I'd lied smoothly. "No syrup, just healthy, boring pancakes." Her eyes had narrowed. Patricia could smell sarcasm like a shark smells blood, but the Tesla was already gliding away, leaving Joe and me in the familiar aftermath of her presence, relieved but somehow diminished. "She means well," Joe had said quietly, and something in my chest had cracked at how automatically he defended her. "I'm sure she does," I replied, though we both knew I was lying. We become good at lying. Joe and I, him pretending everything was fine, me pretending I believed him. But that Saturday, that particular Saturday with its deceptively normal beginning, the lies started unraveling. We made pancakes anyway, with syrup, with chocolate chips, with whipped cream that came from a can, and made inappropriate noises that finally made Joe giggle. "Mom would flip," he said, syrup dripping down his chin. "What Mom doesn't know won't hurt her," I replied, though the words tasted bitter as soon as they left my mouth. Secrets. We were teaching him secrets. After breakfast, we did what we always did, retreated to my study. It was the one room Patricia hadn't managed to sanitize with her presence. The one place that still smelled like leather and bourbon and the particular brand of expensive cologne I'd worn since 1987. The walls were lined with books I'd actually read, photos of moments I'd actually lived, and the artifacts of a life built one decision at a time. Joe loved the globe, an ancient thing, showing countries that didn't exist anymore, borders that had shifted, names that had been erased by history or hubris. He'd spin it slowly, finger trailing across blue oceans and brown continents, asking questions I couldn't always answer. Why did they change? He'd asked that day, pointing to Yugoslavia. "Sometimes things break apart," I'd said carefully. "Sometimes what looks solid isn't." He'd nodded, too seriously for 8, and moved his finger to the Soviet Union. "Like this? Like that? Like families?" The question had hit me sideways, unexpected as a suburban deer in headlights. I'd set down my coffee, my hands weren't quite steady, and really looked at him, really saw him. "What makes you ask that, Joe?" He'd shrugged, but it was the kind of shrug that carries weight, the kind that says everything while saying nothing. "I hear things," he'd said finally. "What kind of things?" Another shrug, another spin of the globe. His finger landed on Antarctica empty, white cold. "Dad says you're being stubborn. Mom says you're being selfish. They use other words when they think I'm asleep. Other words." I could imagine them, could hear Cleveland's clipped consonants and Patricia's precise pronunciation wrapping around words like liability and obstacle and problem to be solved. "Adults sometimes disagree," I'd said carefully. "It doesn't mean." "They were looking at papers," Joe interrupted, still staring at Antarctica. "Insurance papers." The room had suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Insurance papers. Such innocent words. Such terrible implications. "What kind of insurance papers?" Joe had finally looked up at me then, and in his eyes, Cleveland's eyes, my eyes, his great-grandfather's eyes, I saw something that made my blood run cold and hot at the same time. Fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from monsters under beds or shadows in closets. Real fear. Adult fear. The kind that comes from understanding something you shouldn't understand, knowing something you shouldn't know. "The kind that pays money when someone dies," he'd whispered. I'd like to tell you I was shocked. I'd like to say the revelation hit me like lightning, unexpected and electric. But the truth, the terrible, mundane truth, was that it felt like the last piece of a puzzle I'd been assembling without realizing it. The meetings Cleveland had scheduled without me. The documents that required my signature. Just routine updates, Dad. The way Patricia had started asking about my health with the kind of concern that felt more like surveillance. "You look tired, William. Have you been forgetting things, William? Maybe you should see someone, William." William. Not Dad. Not Bill. Not any of the dozen nicknames accumulated over 6 decades. William, like I was already a name on a form, a problem to be processed. "Joe," I'd said, keeping my voice steady the way you do when you're trying not to spook something wild and precious. "I need you to tell me exactly what you heard. Can you do that?" He nodded, tears starting to gather but not quite falling. Brave little soldier in a war he never signed up for. They were in Dad's office. At home. I was supposed to be in bed, but I needed water, and the upstairs bathroom tap is broken. Mom keeps saying she'll fix it, but she never does, so I went downstairs and Dad's door wasn't closed all the way, and they were talking about money, lots of money. And Mom said something about making it look natural, and Dad said you were too healthy, and she said there were ways around that and ... The tears fell then, fast and hard, and I pulled him into my arms because what else could I do? What else was there but to hold this small, breaking thing and promise lies about everything being okay? "It's all right," I murmured into his hair that smelled like children's shampoo and innocence. "It's going to be all right." But it wasn't all right. It was very, very far from all right. Because Cleveland, my son, my heir, my bitter disappointment, wasn't just trying to take my company. He was trying to take my life. I'd built Thompson Manufacturing on 3 principles. Pay your debts, keep your word, and never bet against blood. 2 out of 3, as it turned out, wasn't bad. After Joe had cried himself empty, after Patricia had collected him with her usual surgical precision, after the house had settled back into its expensive silence, I'd done what I'd always done when faced with a problem. I'd worked. Not at the office. Cleveland had eyes there. All eyes. People who saw him as the future and me as the past tense. Instead, I'd worked from my study, pulling strings that Cleveland didn't know existed, calling in favors he didn't know I owned. Billy Thompson, Marcus Wheeler, had answered on the second ring, his voice still carrying that Mississippi drawl that 40 years in Ohio hadn't erased. "Thought you'd forgotten my number. Need a favor, Mark. Must be serious. You haven't called me Mark since that thing in '92. The thing in '92 had involved a competitor, a forged contract, and a solution that had required Marcus's particular skill set. We didn't talk about the thing in '92. It's serious." "How serious?" "Life and death serious." The pause on the other end was long enough to hear his breathing change, shift from casual to careful. "Yours?" "Mine." "Christ, Billy. Who?" "Cleveland." The pause this time was different, heavier. Marcus had known Cleveland since he was born, had been at his baptism, his graduation, his wedding. He'd been there for all the moments that were supposed to mean something. "You sure?" Joe heard them planning it. Insurance papers. Making it look natural. Jesus Christ. "Yeah. What do you need?" What did I need? I needed my son to not be a monster. I needed my daughter-in-law to not be Lady Macbeth in designer jeans. I needed my grandson to unhear what he'd heard, unknow what he knew. But what I needed, and what I could have, were different animals. Evidence, I said finally. Real evidence. The kind that holds up in court. And then, the question that had been circling my brain like water around a drain. What does a father do when his son wants him dead? What does a man do when his blood betrays him? Then I do what needs doing. Marcus had sighed, the sound traveling through the phone like smoke. "I'll make some calls, Billy?" "Yeah." "Watch your back. And maybe ... maybe watch what you eat." Paranoia, it turns out, tastes like everything and nothing. Every meal became suspect. Every drink a potential death sentence. The coffee I'd drunk black for 30 years suddenly seemed sinister. The scotch I'd nursed through countless evenings looked like liquid amber doom. I started eating out. Different restaurants, random choices, never the same place twice. Cleveland noticed. "You're acting strange, Dad," he'd said the following Tuesday. Standing in my office again, because he was always standing in my office, waiting for me to die or retire, whichever came first. "Am I? The secretary says you haven't eaten lunch here in a week. Maybe I'm tired of the cafeteria food." "You own the cafeteria, which is how I know how bad the food is." He'd laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that doesn't reach the eyes, doesn't warm the air, doesn't mean anything except that sound was expected. "We need to talk about succession planning," he'd said, shifting topics with the grace of a bulldozer. "We've talked about it." "No, you've dismissed it." "There's a difference." I'd looked at him then, really looked at him, tried to see the boy who'd once built entire cities out of Legos in my office, who'd fallen asleep on the couch during late nights when his mother was traveling and the babysitter was sick. Tried to find something worth saving. "What would you do?" I'd asked suddenly. "If you had the company tomorrow, what would you do?" His eyes had lit up the first genuine emotion I'd seen in months. Streamline operations. Cut the deadweight. Automate everything that can be automated. Offshore production to Vietnam or Bangladesh. Eliminate the pension obligations, convert everyone to 401k only. Sell the real estate, lease it back. Take on debt to fund expansion into emerging markets. Go public within 18 months. Each word had been a nail in something's coffin. Maybe the company's, maybe his soul's, maybe mine. And the employees? The ones who've been here 20, 30 years. They've had a good run. A good run. Like they were horses to be put down when they stopped winning races. That's 4,000 families, Cleveland. That's business, Dad. No, I'd said quietly. That's betrayal. His face had darkened, storm clouds gathering behind his eyes. Betrayal? You want to talk about betrayal? How about keeping me on a leash for 15 years? How about promising me the company and then refusing to let go? How about planning to kill me? The words had escaped before I could stop them, hung in the air like a confession or an accusation or both. Cleveland had gone very still, very quiet, the kind of still that predators go before they strike. "What did you just say?" "You heard me. You're losing it." His voice was soft, concerned, theatrical. "Dad, you're paranoid. Maybe we should talk to someone. Maybe you should leave my office." He'd left, but not before I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Not guilt, not surprise. Calculation. He was calculating how much I knew, how much I could prove, how much time he had. The answer to all three was not enough, nothing, and running out. Marcus worked fast. Within a week, he had what I needed and more than I wanted. "They're not subtle," he'd said, sliding a manila envelope across the table at a diner neither of us had ever been to before. Credit card records show purchases of some interesting items. Research on inheritance law. Searches for Billy. You don't want to know what they searched for, but I did know. In the end, I looked at everything. Every receipt, every email Marcus's people had somehow acquired. Every piece of evidence that my son and his wife were planning my death with the same attention to detail they'd use for a vacation to CABO. Rohypnol. They'd researched. Rohypnol makes someone confused, Marcus had explained unnecessarily. Makes them seem drunk or senile. Build up small doses over time, ... Makes them look like they're losing it, I'd finished. Like they need to be declared incompetent. Or like they fell down the stairs. Or drove into a tree. Yeah, the diner coffee had tasted like ash, but I drunk it anyway. Something about maintaining normalcy, about pretending the world hadn't tilted off its axis. "There's more," Marcus had said quietly. "They've been in contact with a doctor, one who's been disciplined before for irregular prescriptions." How irregular? The kind that killed Michael Jackson irregular. I'd actually laughed at that. Short, sharp, like broken glass. So it's not just murder. It's medical murder. How modern. Billy. No, it's perfect. Cleveland always did like efficiency. Why use a gun when you can use a prescription pad? Marcus had reached across the table, covered my hand with his. His skin was rough, calloused, real in a way nothing else felt anymore. "What are you going to do? What would you do?" "I'd burn it all down. But I'm not you. You've got the kid to think about." Joe. Everything came back to Joe. 8 years old and carrying the weight of his parents' monstrosity. He can't grow up with them, I'd said. Not after this. Not knowing what they are. Foster care's no picnic either. No, but I'd stopped. An idea forming like ice crystals on glass. Unless he doesn't go to foster care. Billy ... I'm his grandfather. If something happened to them, don't. Marcus's voice had been sharp. Whatever you're thinking, don't. You're not that man. He was right. I wasn't that man. I was just a 68-year-old CEO who'd built an empire and raised a sociopath. I was just a grandfather who made pancakes with too much syrup and kept secrets that were too big for anyone to swallow. But I was also a survivor, and survivors do what they have to do. The next Saturday, Joe arrived as usual, but nothing was usual anymore. I'd spent the week arranging things. Lawyers, accounts, contingencies. If something happened to me, when something happened to me, Joe would be protected. Trust funds they couldn't touch. Guardianship papers they couldn't contest. A paper fortress built from paranoia and love. "You look tired, Grandpa," Joe had said, and for a moment he'd sounded so much like Patricia that my blood had run cold. Just thinking, champion. About what? About what matters. We'd made pancakes again. A ritual, a rebellion, but the sweetness had tasted like sawdust. Joe had noticed. "Are you sad?" "Why would you ask that? You look sad." "Like when Grandma died." Grandma, my Ellen, gone 3 years now from the cancer that had eaten her from the inside out. She'd have known what to do about Cleveland. She'd always known what to do about Cleveland. "I miss her," I'd said, which was true but not the whole truth. "Me too." Joe had pushed his pancakes around his plate, building walls and destroying them. She made better pancakes. She made better everything. We'd sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that only exists between people who don't need words to communicate. But words came anyway, because Joe was 8 and silence was harder to hold than sorrow. "I told them," he'd said suddenly. My fork had frozen halfway to my mouth. "Told who what?" "Mom and Dad. I told them I told you. About the insurance papers." The world had stopped. Actually stopped. No breath, no heartbeat, no nothing except the sound of Joe's voice explaining how he'd been killed. "They got really quiet," he'd continued, oblivious to my paralysis. "Then Dad said I must have misunderstood. And Mom said little boys who tell tales get in trouble. And then they sent me to my room, but I heard them arguing. And Dad said they had to move faster, and Mom said it was too risky, and Joe." I'd found my voice somewhere, pulled it up from whatever depth it had sunk to. "Joe, listen to me. This is very important. Are you scared of your parents?" He'd looked at me with those eyes, Cleveland's eyes, my eyes, eyes that had seen too much too young, sometimes. "Do they hurt you?" "No, not hitting. But sometimes Mom grabs my arm really hard, and sometimes Dad yells so loud my ears ring, and sometimes—" He paused, searching for words an 8-year-old shouldn't need. "Sometimes they look at me like I'm in the way. Like father, like son. Joe, would you like to stay with me? Not just Saturdays, but all the time?" His eyes had gone wide, hope and fear fighting for dominance. "Can I? If you want to. If you'd feel safer." "But what about Mom and Dad? What about them indeed? Let me worry about that." Part 9. The speed of justice. I called the police that afternoon, after Patricia had collected Joe with her usual cold precision. Detective Sarah Chun arrived within an hour, plainclothes and patient. The kind of cop who'd seen enough to believe anything and trust nothing. "You're alleging your son and daughter-in-law are planning to murder you," she'd said. Not a question, but not quite a statement either. "I have evidence." I'd shown her everything. Marcus's envelope, the receipts, the research, the doctor with the irregular prescriptions. She'd looked at each piece carefully, taking photos, making notes, occasionally asking questions that proved she was smarter than her neutral expression suggested. "Why come forward now?" she'd asked finally. "They know that Joe told me. They're accelerating their timeline. You think you're in immediate danger?" "I think my grandson is in immediate danger. He's a witness. He's in the way. I'd stopped, unable to voice the fear that had been growing like a tumor. They look at him like he's a problem to be solved. Detective Chun had studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll need to move fast. Tonight, if possible. Can you get them both in one place? They're coming for dinner tomorrow. Sunday dinner. It's a tradition." The irony of that hadn't been lost on either of us. Tradition. Family gathering around the table, sharing food, sharing lies, sharing the Last Supper before someone's crucifixion. "We'll be ready," she'd said. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to understand. Once we do this, there's no going back." Your son will likely be arrested. Your daughter-in-law, too. Your grandson. My grandson will be safe, I'd interrupted. That's all that matters. But that wasn't all that mattered, and we both knew it. What mattered was that I'd raised a son who could plan my death over breakfast. What mattered was that genes I'd passed on had somehow twisted into something monstrous. What mattered was that tomorrow I'd destroy my family to save what was left of it. Detective Chun had left me with a wire to wear and a warning to be careful. Don't eat or drink anything you don't prepare yourself, she'd said. Don't be alone with them. And Mr. Thompson, don't try to be a hero. Just get them talking. Get them talking. Like they were strangers to be interrogated instead of the son I'd taught to ride a bike and the woman he'd chosen to marry. Part 10. The Last Supper Sunday arrived dressed in perfect weather. The kind of crisp autumn day that makes you believe in God or cosmic irony or both. The leaves were turning gold and amber, and the particular shade of red that looks like dried blood if you're in the right frame of mind, or the wrong one. I'd spent the morning cooking. Pot roast, Cleveland's favorite. The same recipe his mother had used, the one she'd learned from my mother, who'd learned it from hers. 4 generations of tradition, about to end with indigestion and handcuffs. The wire felt like a live snake against my chest, hidden under a sweater Ellen had bought me for Christmas years ago. You look handsome in blue, she'd said. I wondered if I'd look handsome in a courtroom, testifying against our son. They arrived at precisely 2 p.m. Cleveland had always been punctual. It was one of his few virtues, though even that had been weaponized into a form of control. Show up exactly on time. Never early enough to seem eager. Never late enough to seem careless. Dad, he'd kissed my cheek, lips dry as paper. You look well. Disappointed? The word had slipped out, sharp and accidental. Cleveland's eyes had narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just, you seem concerned about my health lately. Patricia had entered then, carrying a bottle of wine like a peace offering or a prop. Joe trailed behind her, small and quiet, a satellite orbiting dangerous planets. William, she'd said, air-kissing somewhere near my ear. The house smells wonderful, just like Mom used to make, Cleveland had added. And for a moment, just a moment, his voice had carried something that might have been real emotion. We'd gathered in the dining room, the same room where Cleveland had announced his engagement, where we'd celebrated Joe's first birthday, where Ellen had told us about the cancer, the good and the bad, all soaked into the wood grain like memory into bone. Wine, Patricia had offered, already pouring. I'll stick with water. Since when do you refuse a good Malbec? Cleveland's voice had carried an edge. Since my doctor suggested I cut back. Your doctor. Patricia's smile had been sharp enough to cut glass. Have you been seeing someone new? Someone we should know about? There it was. The probe. The search for information. Are you on to us? Do you know? How much time do we have? Just the usual checkups, I'd lied smoothly. Blood pressure, cholesterol, the thrilling adventures of aging. Joe had been pushing peas around his plate, building little green walls between the meat and potatoes. He hadn't looked up once. Joe, I'd said gently. Not hungry? My stomach hurts. Since when? Patricia's voice had shifted, sharpened. You didn't mention. Since you told me Grandpa was sick, Joe had said quietly, and the room had frozen. We never said. Cleveland had started. You said he was getting confused. You said he might have to go away. You said, Joe. Patricia's hand had landed on his arm, the grip too tight to be maternal. We discussed this. Private conversations. Let him talk, I'd said, my voice carrying more authority than I'd felt. What else did they say, Joe? The wire against my chest had felt like it was burning. Detective Chun and her team were listening, waiting, ready to move. All I needed was one clear admission, one unambiguous statement of intent. They said you were too stubborn to retire, Joe had whispered. They said you was standing in the way of progress. They said, that's enough. Cleveland had stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood like fingernails on a chalkboard. Joe, go to your room. We're at Grandpa's house. Then go to the living room. The adults need to talk. Joe had looked at me, asking permission with his eyes. I'd nodded, and he'd fled like a refugee from a war zone. Well, I'd said, once his footsteps had faded, shall we discuss what you really came here for? Part 11. The truth. Unvarnished Patricia had moved first, reaching into her purse with the casual motion of someone getting lipstick or mints. But I'd seen Marcus's research. I knew what she carried besides cosmetics. "Looking for something?" I'd asked. Her hand had stilled. "Just my phone." "The one you used to research rohypnol? Or the one you used to contact Dr. Melissa Hartman?" The silence that followed could have choked a horse. Cleveland's face had gone through a rainbow of emotions: surprise, calculation, anger, and finally, something that might have been relief. "You know," he'd said simply. "I know." "How long?" "Long enough." Patricia's hand had come out of her purse empty, but her eyes were full of something dark and dangerous. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she'd said, and for the first time since I'd met her, she sounded genuinely human. "You were supposed to just fade. Lots of older people develop dementia. It would have been gentle. I tasted the word like wine gone to vinegar. You were going to poison me gently." "It's not poison," Cleveland had protested, as if the semantics mattered. "It's medication. Misused maybe, but nothing." I'd stood, my legs surprisingly steady. "You were going to kill me for money, for the company, for the convenience of not having to wait. 43 years, Dad." Cleveland's voice had cracked like ice in spring. "I've waited 43 years, watching you build your empire, watching you play king, watching you decide who's worthy and who's not. Do you know what it's like to be judged insufficient by your own father every single day? So you decided to murder me? We decided to accelerate the inevitable." Patricia's voice was cold, clinical. "You're 68. Your health isn't perfect. Your wife is dead. What exactly are you holding on for? For him?" I pointed toward the living room where Joe waited. "For my grandson. For the company's employees. For the principle that you don't murder people because they're inconvenient." Principle. Cleveland had laughed, bitter as black coffee. "You want to talk about principle? How about the principle of keeping your promises? You said the company would be mine. You said I'd lead it into the future. I said you'd inherit it. I never said I'd die on your schedule. Your schedule." He'd moved closer, and I'd smelled his cologne, the same brand I wore, because even in his rebellion, he couldn't escape my shadow. "Everything's always been about your schedule, your timeline, your vision. Well, what about mine? Yours involves murder. Yours involves stagnation." We'd stood there, father and son, close enough to embrace, far enough apart to be strangers. The wire against my chest had captured every word, every breath, every heartbeat of betrayal. "Did you ever love me?" The question had escaped before I could stop it, vulnerable and pathetic and necessary. Cleveland had blinked, surprised. "What? Did you ever love me? As a father? As a person? Or was I always just an obstacle?" For a moment, just a moment, I'd seen my son again. The boy who'd cried when his goldfish died. The teenager who'd worked summers in the warehouse, proud to be part of something bigger. The young man who'd stood at his mother's funeral, holding my hand like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "I loved who I thought you were," he'd said finally. "But that person never existed, did he? You were always the company first, father second. And you're a murderer first, son second." "I'm a survivor," he'd shot back. "Just like you taught me." That's when the door had exploded open. Not dramatically, Detective Chun was too professional for that, but purposefully, deliberately, inevitably. "Cleveland Thompson, Patricia Thompson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." The words had sounded surreal, like dialogue from a bad TV show. But the handcuffs were real. The Miranda rights were real. The look of hatred in my son's eyes as they led him away, that was the realest thing I'd ever seen. Part 12. What remains the trial took 8 months. 8 months of testimony, evidence, character witnesses who painted Cleveland as either ambitious or psychotic, depending on who was paying them. Patricia tried to cut a deal, threw Cleveland under the bus, so fast it would have been funny if it wasn't my son being roadkill. She got 7 years. He got 15. The math seemed wrong somehow. 15 years for trying to kill the man who'd given him life. But then, I'd gotten life for raising a son who'd want me dead. So maybe the math was perfect. Joe lives with me now. The custody hearing was a formality. Who else was there? Patricia's parents were dead. Cleveland's mother was dead. And I was the only one left standing in the wreckage of our family tree. He's different now. Quieter, but not broken. Careful, but not scared. We make pancakes every Saturday, drowning them in syrup, because there's no one left to tell us not to. Do you hate them? He'd asked one morning, about 3 months after the trial ended. No. Why not? Because hate takes energy, and I'm old. You're not that old. Old enough to be tired, young enough to raise you. He'd smiled at that. The first real smile I'd seen since everything exploded. Will they come back? Eventually. Will you forgive them? I'd thought about that for a long moment, watching the syrup pool on my plate like amber blood. I'll forgive Cleveland, I'd said finally. He's my son. I helped make him what he is. But forgiveness doesn't mean trust. It doesn't mean forgetting. It just means letting go of the weight. What about Patricia? Patricia was never really family. She was just someone who married in and saw an opportunity. She's my mom. Biology doesn't make family, Joe. Choice does. Love does. Showing up does. He nodded, wise beyond his years because wisdom was the scar tissue that grew over wounds. Thompson Manufacturing still stands. I go to the office 3 days a week now, training my replacement, a woman from outside the family, someone with no blood in the game, no inheritance to accelerate. The employees know what happened. Cleveland's arrest made the papers, made the evening news, made us infamous in the way that family tragedies become public entertainment. But they still show up, still work, still pretend that having a boss who was almost murdered by his son is normal. Morning, Mr. Thompson, they say, and I hear the unspoken addition. Glad you're still alive. Morning, I reply, and they hear my unspoken response. Me too. The board wanted me to step down immediately. Bad optics, they said. Distraction from the company's mission. But I own 51% of the shares, and possession is 9/10 of staying alive, so I stayed. Just until things stabilize, I told them. Though we all knew stability was a myth, a story we told ourselves while standing on tectonic plates. Marcus stops by the office sometimes, checking in without admitting he's checking in. You look good, he'd said last week. For someone who was almost murdered, for someone who survived. Survival. That word again. Cleveland had been right about one thing. I was a survivor. But he'd been wrong about what that meant. Surviving wasn't about destroying threats or eliminating obstacles. It was about enduring betrayal without becoming bitter, facing murder without becoming murderous, raising your grandson without raising another monster. How's the kid? Marcus had asked. Healing. And you? Scar tissues forming. That's not the same as healing. It's close enough. But it wasn't close enough, and we both knew it. Because every night, I stood in my study, staring at the photo of Cleveland's college graduation, both of us smiling, both of us proud, both of us believing in a future that would never arrive, and wondered where I'd gone wrong. Part 14. Letters never sent. Cleveland writes me letters from prison. 1 a month, regular as clockwork, precise as poison. I don't open them. They stack up in my desk drawer like accusations, like apologies, like ammunition for a war I'm too tired to fight. Joe knows about them. Why don't you read them? He'd asked once. Because some words can't be taken back. But what if he's sorry? Sorry for trying to kill me, or sorry he got caught. Joe had thought about that, his face serious in the lamplight. Does it matter? Yes. Why? Because one means he's changed. The other means he's just waiting. Waiting for what? For another chance. The truth was harder than that, though. The truth was that I was afraid of what those letters might contain. Not threats or anger. I could handle those. But what if they contained love? What if Cleveland had found, in the forced reflection of a prison cell, the son I'd always wanted? What if redemption was possible, but only after everything was already destroyed? Better not to know. Better to let the letters stack up like years, unopened and full of possibility or poison. Patricia doesn't write. Her liar does, asking about Joe, pushing for visitation rights, making noise about maternal bonds and psychological damage. I let my lawyer respond with words like attempted murder and child endangerment, and when hell freezes over. Joe doesn't ask about visiting her. He doesn't ask about much anymore. Just absorbs the world through those careful eyes, processing everything, trusting nothing completely, except pancakes. He still trusts pancakes. Part 15. The weight of tomorrow yesterday was Joe's 9th birthday. We had a party small, just us and Marcus and a few kids from school whose parents were brave enough to let them visit the house where an attempted murder was planned. I bought him a globe, modern, updated, with current borders and correct names. He'd spun it slowly, fingers trailing across familiar paths. "It's different," he'd said. "Different how? The countries are right." "Is that better?" He'd thought about it, then shaken his head. "Not better, just different." The old one showed how things change. 9 years old and already understanding impermanence. My grandson, the philosopher. After the party, after the cake and the careful fun, we'd sat in my study while Rain painted patterns on the windows. "Grandpa?" "Yeah, champion? Will I be like him?" I'd known this question was coming. I'd rehearsed my answer 100 times. But sitting there, looking at this child who carried Cleveland's DNA in my hope, all my prepared words turned to dust. "You'll be like you," I'd said finally. "You get to choose who that is. But what if I choose wrong?" "Then you choose again. That's what life is, Joe. Choosing again and again until you get it right." Did Dad choose wrong? Yes. Could he choose again? Maybe. But some choices close off other choices. He chose to try to hurt me. That closed off the choice to be my son in the same way. But he's still your son, biologically. But family, real family, is more than blood. Joe had nodded, understanding more than any 9-year-old should have to understand. Am I real family? I'd pulled him close then. This small, damaged, perfect thing. The realist, I'd whispered into his hair. The very realist. Part 16. What we tell ourselves, the company is changing. Not the way Cleveland wanted. No automation apocalypse, no offshore exodus, but evolving, adapting, surviving. We're implementing new technologies gradually, keeping the workforce intact, proving that progress doesn't require betrayal. The new CEO starts next month. Catherine Chun, no relation to Detective Chun, though the coincidence makes me smile. She's 42, brilliant, and has no interest in my money beyond her salary. She has her own family, her own life, her own ambitions that don't involve watching me die. "Why me?" she'd ask during the final. "Because you don't need anything from me except a chance. That's it. That's everything." She'd started laughing then, surprising us both. "You know what's funny? My dad told me not to take this job. Said working for you was cursed. Said your own son. My son is in prison for trying to kill me." "Exactly. So my dad figured you must be impossible to work for. And you think differently?" "I think anyone who inspires that much hatred or that much loyalty must be doing something interesting." "Which do you think I inspire more of?" "Depends on the day, doesn't it?" I'd hired her on the spot. Part 17. The quality of time. Time moves differently now. Not faster or slower, just heavier. Each day carries weight, significance, the knowledge that it was almost taken away. Joe and I have developed routines. Morning pancakes on weekends. Homework at the kitchen table. Stories before bed. Not fairy tales, but real stories about his grandmother. About the company's early days. About the grandfather he barely remembers, who built things with his hands and believed in the solidity of family. "Tell me about Dad when he was little," Joe had asked last night. So I did. I told him about Cleveland at 5, insisting on wearing a suit to kindergarten. Cleveland at 10, creating elaborate business plans for a lemonade stand. Cleveland at 15, working in the warehouse and complaining about every minute while doing excellent work. "He sounds normal," Joe had said, confused. He was normal. That's the hardest part. What changed? I don't know. Maybe nothing changed. Maybe he was always capable of this, and I just gave him a reason. "That's not your fault, isn't it?" I raised him. I shaped him. I created the thing he wanted badly enough to kill for. Joe had been quiet for a long moment, processing this with that supernatural wisdom that trauma grants to children. "You also created the thing that saved you," he'd said finally. "You saved me. No, you saved yourself by being someone worth saving." 9 years old. 9 years old, and already understanding things about love and worth that his parents never grasped. Part 18. The possibility of forgiveness. This morning, I opened one of Cleveland's letters. Just one. The most recent. "Dad, I know you're not reading these. I know because you're smart. and smart people don't read letters from people who tried to kill them. But I'm writing anyway, because it's the only thing I can do from here besides think. And thinking is killing me faster than I was trying to kill you. That's a joke. Patricia says I shouldn't joke about it, but Patricia says a lot of things, and following her advice is what got me here. I want to say I'm sorry, but that word is too small for what I did. It's like trying to bail out the Titanic with a teaspoon. So instead, I'll say this. I understand now. I understand why you held on to the company so tightly. It wasn't about power or control. It was about purpose, about building something that matters. I'm building something here too. Teaching literacy to other inmates. It's small, maybe meaningless, but it's mine. And for the first time in my life, I'm not doing it to impress you or spite you or become you. I'm doing it because it needs doing. Joe should hate me. You should hate me. I hate me most days. But hatred is exhausting, and I'm tired of being exhausted. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. But I wanted you to know that your son, the one you actually raised, not the one I became, he's still in here somewhere. Prison is good for finding things you thought were lost, including yourself. Cleveland PS. Thank you for keeping Joe. Thank you for being the father to him that I couldn't be. Thank you for surviving me. I'd sat with that letter for an hour, reading and rereading, looking for manipulation, finding only exhaustion that matched my own. Then I'd written back, just once. Just this. Cleveland, surviving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. Forgiving you might be harder, but I'm 68 years old, and carrying hatred is like carrying stones. Eventually, you have to put them down or they'll bury you. I'm putting them down, not for you. For Joe. For me. For the possibility that redemption isn't just a story we tell ourselves, but something that actually happens. Slowly, painfully, one day at a time. Keep teaching. Keep building. Keep finding the son I lost. Maybe one day we'll find each other again. Dad PS. Joe doesn't hate you. He's afraid of you, disappointed in you, confused by you, but not hate. He's too much like his grandmother for hate. Part 19. What grows from ashes? The garden behind the house had been Ellen's domain. After she died, I'd let it go wild, unable to bear either maintaining it or destroying it. But this spring, Joe had asked if we could plant something. What kind of something? I'd asked. Something Grandma would have liked. So we planted roses. Red ones, because Ellen had loved red roses despite their cliched symbolism. Or maybe because of it. Life doesn't have to be original, she'd said once. It just has to be lived. The roses grew fast, aggressive, thorny. Joe tended them with the patience of someone who understood that beautiful things could draw blood. They're protective, he'd said one morning, after a thorn had caught his thumb. That's one way to look at it. What's another way? That everything has the capacity to hurt, even beautiful things. Especially beautiful things, he'd corrected. And I'd wondered when he'd learned that lesson. Probably around the time his parents had been arrested for attempted murder. The garden became our project. Not just roses, but vegetables, herbs, things that could be eaten, used, shared. The neighbors started stopping by for tomatoes, for basil, for the simple novelty of taking something from the attempted murder house and finding it sweet. Your grandson has a gift, Mrs. Chun from next door had said, holding a bag of perfect cucumbers. He does, I'd agreed, though I wasn't sure if we were talking about gardening or surviving, or the ability to grow things in poisoned soil. Part 20. The revision of history Joe's school assigned a family tree project. The kind of innocent assignment that becomes a minefield when your father's in prison and your mother's a convicted conspirator. What do I write? He'd asked, staring at the blank branches. The truth. Which truth? Because he'd learned too young that truth was flexible, that facts could be arranged to tell different stories. Your truth, I'd said, the one you can live with. He'd worked on it for days, careful as a surgeon. In the end, he'd drawn the tree but labeled it differently. Instead of names and dates, he'd written qualities. Where Cleveland's name should have been ambition, caution. Where Patricia's belonged, planning, patience. Where mine sat, endurance, exhaustion. Where Ellen's memory lived, love, loss. And for himself, at the bottom of the tree, beginning again. His teacher had called, concerned. It's not exactly what we asked for, she'd said carefully. Joe doesn't have an exact family. Yes, I understand, but perhaps something more traditional? Ms. Patterson, tradition in our house involves attempted murder and conspiracy charges. Would you prefer he diagram that? She'd hung up quickly, and Joe had gotten an A. Part 21. The currency of trust Marcus had been right about the money. The insurance policy Cleveland and Patricia had taken out on me was worth $12 million. Double indemnity for accidental death. The policy was evidence in the trial, but afterward, the insurance company had to decide what to do with it. They'd called last week. Mr. Thompson, the policy is still active. You're still the insured. The beneficiaries are imprisoned, but cancel it. Sir, you could change the beneficiary. Your grandson. Cancel it. Money with blood on it doesn't spend clean. It's $12 million, Mr. Thompson. I know exactly what it is. It's the price my son put on my life. Cancel it. I'd hung up before they could argue further. Joe didn't need blood money. He had a trust fund, clean money, earned money. Money that wouldn't whisper your father tried to kill for this every time he spent it. That evening, I told Joe about the policy, about canceling it, about choosing clean over easy. $12 million is a lot, he'd said carefully. It is. We could have done good things. We can do good things without it. He'd thought about that, then nodded. It would have felt weird, wouldn't it? Like they won in a way. Exactly like that. Grandpa? Yeah? Are we poor now? I'd laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. No, champion. We're just not rich on attempted murder. That's a weird sentence. We're a weird family. The weirdest, he'd agreed, and somehow made it sound like a compliment. Part 22. The approach of endings. I turn 69 next month. The age feels significant somehow, like I'm living on borrowed time, stolen time, time Cleveland tried to take. My health is good ironic, considering the elaborate medical murder that had been planned. The doctor says I have the heart of a younger man. No, I wonder if she'd say that if she knew how much of it was scar tissue. You need to slow down, she'd said at my last checkup. I'm raising a 9-year-old. That's exactly why you need to slow down. Pace yourself. You need to last another decade at least. A decade. 10 years to get Joe through high school, into college, into something resembling a normal life. It seems both forever and not nearly enough. I'll try, I told her, though we both knew trying and succeeding were different animals. The truth is, I'm tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that settles into your bones like winter cold. The kind that comes from surviving things you shouldn't have to survive. From being betrayed by blood, from raising your grandson because your son is in prison for trying to kill you. But tired isn't dead. And as long as I'm not dead, I have work to do. Part 23. While we pass on Joe's learning the business. Not formally, he's 9, but absorbing it through osmosis. Through listening, through being present in ways Cleveland never was. Why do we make things? He'd asked during a factory tour. Because people need things. But why do we make them? Why not someone else? Because we can do it well. And doing something well is a form of respect. Respect for who? For the people who use what we make. For the people who make it. For the idea that work should mean something. He'd nodded, watching the assembly line with those serious eyes. Dad didn't think that, did he? Your dad thought efficiency was more important than meaning. Was he wrong? He was incomplete. Efficiency without meaning is just motion. Meaning without efficiency is just dreams. You need both. Is that why you wouldn't retire? Because the meaning wasn't complete. Sometimes, Joe's questions cut straight to bone, sharp and clean and necessary. Maybe. Or maybe I was just too stubborn to let go. Maybe both, he'd said, and I'd recognized Ellen's wisdom in his voice. Gene's skipping a generation to land somewhere safe. Part 24. The possibility of peace. Patricia was released last week. Early parole for good behavior, which apparently included teaching yoga to other inmates and finding God in a way that impressed the parole board. She'd called the house once. I'd answered, not recognizing the number. William? Her voice had been different. Smaller, maybe. Or just emptied of its usual calculating edge. Patricia. I want to see Joe. No, I'm his mother. You're the woman who tried to murder his grandfather. I've changed. Prison does that. I mean it, William. I found clarity. I found You found a parole board that believed your performance, but I don't. Stay away from Joe. You can't keep him from me forever. I can until he's 18 and can decide for himself. That's 9 years. 9 years for you to prove you've actually changed. 9 years for Joe to grow strong enough to survive you if you haven't. She'd been quiet for a long moment. I did love him, in my way. Your way involved planning murder in the next room while he slept. I never would have hurt him. You did hurt him. Every day since you were arrested, you hurt him. Every nightmare. Every question about why Mommy wanted to kill Grandpa. Every time he flinches when someone raises their voice, that's you hurting him. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't unbreak things, Patricia. It just acknowledges the breaking. I'd hung up then, my hand shaking slightly. Joe had been in the garden, visible through the window, carefully tying tomato plants to stakes. Safe, protected, mine to raise. That night, I told him about the call. She's out? Yes. Will she come here? Not if I can help it. What if she does anyway? Then we deal with it, together. He nodded, but I'd seen the fear flickering in his eyes like candlelight. Joe, she can't hurt us anymore. She has no power here. She had no power before, and she still tried to hurt you. The logic of children perfect and devastating. That's true. But now we know what she's capable of. Before, we trusted. Now, we know better. Is knowing better the same as being safe? No, but it's safer than ignorance. He'd accepted then, the way he accepted all the difficult truths of his upside-down life, with grace I didn't deserve and strength he shouldn't need. Epilogue. The weight of truth. It's been a year since that Saturday when Joe told me about the insurance papers. A year of lawyers and trials and learning to sleep without wondering if tomorrow would come. A year of raising Joe, of watching him grow around his trauma like a tree grows around wire still growing, just shaped differently. Cleveland has 3 more years before his first parole hearing. His letters come less frequently now, but when they do, they're longer, deeper, more like the son I thought I was raising. Prison, it seems, is teaching him what privilege never could, that actions have consequences. That time is finite, that love isn't owed but earned. I write back sometimes. Not often, but enough. Enough to leave the door cracked for the possibility of something, not reconciliation exactly, but maybe coexistence. The kind where we can be in the same room without anyone calling 911. Joe reads voraciously now. Business books, oddly enough. He says he wants to understand what makes people choose money over family. I tell him that if he figures it out, he'll be wiser than his grandfather. He says that's not a high bar, and we both laugh because humor is how we metabolize horror. The company thrives under Catherine's leadership. She sends me reports I pretend to read, though really I just look at the employee retention numbers. Still at 94%, still taking care of families, still meaning something more than money. This morning, Joe and I made pancakes. Our usual ritual, our small rebellion against the parts of life that tried to break us. He's getting better at flipping them, though half still end up folded or floor-bound. Grandpa? He'd said, maple syrup making his words sticky sweet. Yeah? Do you think Dad thinks about us? Every day. Do you think he regrets it? I think he regrets getting caught. I hope he regrets the rest. What's the difference? One is about consequences. The other is about conscience. Which one matters more? I'd thought about that. Really thought about it. While the morning sun painted gold stripes across our kitchen table, across our shared survival, across our strange little family of 2. Conscience, I'd said finally. Consequences end. Conscience is forever. Joe had nodded, satisfied or at least accepting. Then he'd reached for more syrup, drowning his pancakes in sweetness. And I'd let him because life is short, and childhoods are shorter, and sometimes the best rebellion is just choosing joy over rules. I love you, Grandpa, he'd said suddenly, unprompted, the words falling like grace into the morning light. I love you too, champion. And in that moment, in that kitchen that had seen so much planning for death, we were planning for life instead. Imperfect life. Complicated life. Life that grows from poisoned ground and blooms anyway, thorns and all. The grandfather clock in the hallway, my father's, then mine. Someday Joe's chimed 9 times. 9 o'clock. 9 years old. 9 years until he's free to choose his own path. to decide what kind of man he'll be, to break the cycle or continue it. I'm betting on breaking. I'm betting on Joe. After all, I'm 69 years old. I've survived my own son's attempt to murder me, and I'm raising my grandson in the ruins of what was supposed to be a dynasty. If that's not a gamble worth taking, I don't know what is. The morning stretches ahead of us, full of small possibilities. We'll work in the garden. We'll read books. We'll pretend that making pancakes together is enough to heal what's broken. And maybe, through pretending long enough, we'll make it true. Because that's what survival really is, not just continuing to breathe, but continuing to believe that breathing matters. That tomorrow will be different. That boys who discover their parents are monsters can still grow up to be good men. That grandfathers who fail at raising sons can succeed at raising grandsons. That love, real love, the kind that survives betrayal and attempted murder and the complete collapse of everything you thought you knew. That love weighs more than money, more than companies, more than the bitter heritage of blood gone bad. Joe finishes his pancakes, carries his plate to the sink without being asked, a small miracle of responsibility, and turns to me with those eyes that have seen too much but still manage to hope. What are we doing today, Grandpa? Whatever we want, champion. Whatever we want. And for the first time in a year, I actually believe it. We can do whatever we want. We're free, not free from the past. That's always with us, heavy as Cleveland's name, sharp as Patricia's smile, but free to choose what we do with it. Free to make pancakes, free to plant roses, free to love each other in the ruins of what was supposed to be a different life entirely. The weight of truth, it turns out, is exactly as heavy as you make it. And today, this morning, with syrup-sticky fingers and imperfect pancakes, and my grandson's laughter finally returning to something like real today, the truth weighs nothing at all. Today, we float. Tomorrow, who knows? But today, we float. And that's enough. More than enough. It's everything. Thank you for staying with me and listening this far. Your attention is a gift. Did these minutes mean something to you? Then please, follow the channel. Every click from you is a push that helps me keep bringing stories that truly stay with us.